A senior official tells CBS News about 500 immigrant children forcibly separated from their parents have been reunited since the zero-tolerance border policy began in May.
It is still unclear, though, how many of them are being detained with their families or remain in the U.S. And child psychologists say this could have a profound impact on their development.
With more on what those long-term effects could look like, we are joined now by Dr. Jane Aronson. She is the founder and the CEO of Worldwide Orphans. Good to see you, Jane.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Vlad.
So Jane and I met in Haiti when we were there for the earthquake in 2010, and we got to know her because there was a child that we discovered who had been buried for 5 days in a hole, and his parents had died in the earthquake, and he was rescued, and we didn't think that he would make it, and he is thriving now. And so you are very familiar with the trauma that young children go through, either through natural disaster or through even just sort of mental trauma. What do you think will happen, even if it's just for a couple of days, 20 days, for example, that a child can be taken from his parents and put in a place that they are not familiar with, and even if they're ultimately reunited, what kind of psychological trauma are we talking about?
I think we know this. That's what's really, good in a way, is that there's so much science that's been applied to the study of stress, toxicity, and trauma. American Academy of Pediatrics has a section devoted to this area of study. It's required for our medical education. But if you look back at one of the best sources of information we have, it's the ACEs, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies, which was a compilation of data and questionnaire answers of thousands of clients at Kaiser Permanente between 1995 and 1997. And then that was studied and organized into 50-plus scholarly peer-reviewed studies, evidence-based medicine, as we really need to talk about. And we look at that data and we see, what do people look like 30 years from that time? What do people who've been neglected, what do children, adults? You can look back at adult lives, or you can look at the formative going forward lives of children, and you see that with neglect, physical abuse, medical, psychological, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, domestic violence in the home, even simple things, believe it or not, being exposed to conflict in the home. All of those circumstances have now been quantified long term. So when you look at children growing up to be adults in communities, they have inopportunity. These are youngsters who become adults who don't get a good education. They can't learn. They suffer from behavioral issues. They get depressed. They don't finish school. They end up having a higher rate of suicide, substance abuse, both drugs and alcohol. And the worst part of it is that their social connections and their ability to be intimate is harmed. Their ability to attach, to have secure attachment, and then when they do form families, they may have difficulty attaching to their own children. They may not be able to parent their own children. So it's a disaster. It is truly a disaster. There is no getting around it. The science is there. Now, what's really important to recognize this is resiliency. So I want everyone to know that we don't want this, but what's really intrinsically valuable to understand is that there's ways to treat and manage. There's many training programs and psychological programs that can be available to children and families. The most important thing I think I can share with everybody is that it's about play and education, finally. When kids are traumatized early on in life, if you can get them into a setting where there's play and attachment opportunities with loving adults who may not even be their parents, because this is my work with Worldwide Orphans. We're all around the world with toy libraries, and we bring this to shelters and schools and clinics and libraries, and we're mobile, and we're working with impoverished human beings who've suffered terrible tragedies, whether it's war, conflict, disaster. The best way to deal with all of that is to normalize the pattern of the child quickly. Activities of daily living, routine meals, dressed nicely. That is key. I was telling Vlad, I found out today that the Cayuga Center here in the city, where there's 239 kids, they're living like they're in a concentration camp.
These are the kids that
they were displaced from. They had been taken from their parents, separated, and then they were placed in different locations.
As part of this policy that
exactly.
Okay.
And so these kids are wearing gray shorts, gray shirts. Their faces are empty and blank. They're not eating the kinds of fun things that kids need to be eating. They're not playing. They're not in school. They're not learning. they're like little, like, I don't know, it's like Stepford children we used to refer to.
We've heard from members of the administration who say, listen, in these centers, they get food, they're going to school, they're taking showers, their medical care is taken care of. I mean, they've sort of got a checklist, and they say this is humane. But I've read some reports also where, some of the staff are told that you can comfort the children, but you can't hug them.
This is like, Geneva's rules for war. Mm-hmm. When you described it just now, I'm reminded, like, they're doing this sort of standardized criteria, but the key feature of all of this is what's missing is human contact. So, yes, they're concerned about child protection issues, that there shouldn't be abuse from adult to child. You can control all of that. There's play. I mean, toy library. We control all of that. We're training adults, loving adults to be mentors and teachers and to play. And school, what kind of education are they getting? Have they been assessed? Many of these kids come from poor backgrounds where there are special needs and they've not been assessed. We don't even know where their development is. We do that. Everyone who works with children who've been in traumatizing situations, you evaluate each kid individually. There's no social work infrastructure in these settings. That's the problem that's been going on for God knows how many decades. But if you look at the last 10 years, where it's changed from Mexican immigration to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, etc., you see the change in the way in which we create these systems. There's no tracking. There are no social workers following anybody. There's no system in place to have continuity.
So how concerned are you? Sorry, Vlad, but I was just thinking, a lot of the companies that have received these government contracts, they've been doing this sort of thing all along, but now they're ramping it up. Right now, instead of just a couple hundred kids, we're dealing with, 500 kids, 2,000 kids. How concerned are you when you describe the conditions that you're describing, which it seems like you think they're sort of very basic and, in fact, basic is substandard, but then you multiply it? Are you concerned that they're just not going to be able to give these kids what they need?
There's no question they're not going to give them what they need. They don't have what needs to be in place. It's so funny. Sometimes people ask me, so what are you doing that's different? And that's so key to all of this. What are we doing that's different is that there's a commitment. You know how it feels to commit to friends and family and coworkers. There's an emotional connection that occurs. There's a kind of closeness that you need to have with vulnerable humans, whether they're adults or children, elderly, middle-aged. We all need this feeling like this, like we just need to be held emotionally and physically. Holding, closeness. I mean, it's hard to bear.
So I guess the question ultimately is, you've heard people say, look, they've got, one pundit described it as summer camp, right? But I keep going back, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. I keep going back to the facilities may be up to snuff, when that can certainly happen. But I'm just concerned about the trauma of separating a child who doesn't know what's going on.
Even if it is 45 days or 20 days or a week.
Children don't understand time. I mean, people always talk about, how does my dog know, when I'm coming home? I mean, children, dogs, animals, everyone has difficulty understanding that sense of when. Like, kids just don't know when. So you take children away. Where's the understanding of time? Time is forever for them. When are they coming back? They don't know when someone's coming back. There's no promise made. These are traumatic moments in a child's life. It's just over. It's done for them. They don't know when. Yeah. They don't understand any of that. And they just have a sense of loss. And they're just sitting there, blank, empty, traumatized. I have a better way of sharing with you. And that is just imagine for yourselves that you're little and your parent who you're attached to and close. You shop, you eat, you sleep, you laugh, you hang out together. They're your best friends. I mean, that's what life is in a family, your best friends. And suddenly that person has just disappeared. They're nowhere to be found. The child becomes chaotic. They become hysterical, physically disorganized. They can't eat, they can't sleep, they become sleep deprived. Then they lose their appetite. And they have no sense of what's going to happen. They become resigned. There's something called the resignation syndrome, which is found in people who are often displaced and have no hope of changing displacement. Where's my home? And that resignation is what can happen to youngsters who don't understand, when is it going to change? When are they coming back to hold me and touch me?
It's clear that we're not going to know the effects of this policy on these children for some time to come. But Dr. Jane Aronson, thank you so much for shedding some light on what they could possibly be going through. We appreciate it.